invite you to open your Bibles to Matthew chapter 22, verses 1 through 14. One of the most auspicious occasions any one of us could be invited to would be a wedding. But imagine being invited not to just a normal wedding, but the wedding. The wedding that God the Father throws for His Son. The King throws for the King's Son. And go a step further and imagine you are invited to this auspicious occasion. Imagine you get this incredible invitation. The wedding capital of the world is Las Vegas. They have made weddings so easy that with $60 and just minutes before midnight, a wedding license can be issued. And it is valid for an entire year. All you've got to do to make it come into force is have a wedding ceremony. And guess what? They have a lot of wedding chapels in Las Vegas. You can just take your pick. And when you come in there, you think, well, it's just $60. But then you find out it's this much for the preacher. It's this much for the use of the building. And you can pay between $30,000 and $60,000 for a wedding in Las Vegas. And yet, you get this invitation to something like that, and you may accept it, you may not, but imagine getting an invitation to the wedding reception that the King throws for His Son. And you and I get that invitation every single moment of our lives. And we celebrate it at least once a week when we come and we gather together. Every time we open our Bibles, every time we as a church, as the bride of Christ comes together, we are again part of that. And that's all we really need to be part of this reception. Yet, not many understand how important this is. Not many fully grasp what happens if you get this invitation and you just turn it down. And we're sending out these invitations right now. We're inviting the whole world to come be part of this. And some will accept this invitation. Others will look at it and say, well, that I'll file under file number 13, and never really realize. But you know, judgment begins at the household of God. And so before we can talk about what's going to happen at the end of this month, we need to talk about what's happening here. How serious do you take the invitation to be part of the body? Let me ask you this. How many of you received an invitation to be here to worship with the bride of Christ 11 a.m. on this Sunday morning? Let me see a show of hands. You all did. Everybody raise your hands. You all received this invitation. Okay, how many of you accepted this invitation? Right. We don't need CPAs to figure this out, right? We all got this. Right, Chris? We understand it. We're all invited and we're all here. Now, because you're all here, what is that telling your children? And Kyle, I really appreciate that prayer. The emphasis on the way we're bringing up our children. And I'm thinking about Kyle's little daughter, Em, running around here on a Wednesday night, building relationships. And I'm thinking about her coming here to Sunday school and building relationships. And I'm thinking about her hitting 13 and 14. And Kyle, yes, it's going to happen. And Kyle and Alicia have established that routine, you see. And it's going to be so much easier. I'm telling you, it's going to be so much easier. There's wisdom in all of this. This is an invitation that you get at least 4 times a week to be with the body. And specifically, I'm talking about now. So let's look at verse 1, the scriptures verse 1 and 2 that Paul read. And you see this impressive occasion. And again, Jesus spoke to them in parables, saying, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a feast for his son. This is Jesus Christ preaching to you and I a message, and the words are coming out of his mouth as God the Father is feeding them into his mind. And so he's hearing them as we hear them. And I'm wondering what he's thinking about when he thinks about this incredible wedding reception. I wonder what's going through his mind when he thinks about what does the Father have in store for me. There's a lady by the name of Emily Post who died a few years ago, and she was the lady of etiquette. She wrote a book more than 600 pages on etiquette. And everything you and I would ever need to know was in this book. And so people still to this day go back to Emily and say, from a book, what should we do in this and this situation? And one day she got a real strange question. And the question was, what do I do if I'm invited to the White House for dinner and I have a previous engagement? What do you think she said? She said this: an invitation to lunch or dine at the White House is a command and automatically cancels all other engagements. You were invited to the reception this morning that the king is throwing for his son. He does it regularly. Some of you have previous engagements, and I'm so appreciative that you've accepted this one, that you've chosen to be with us today. But really, when you think about it, it's an incredible opportunity you were given. And what would it have said to the king if you refused this invitation? Now, I know people are going to get this invitation, and they're not going to know Summit Church of Christ from any, and some of them will accept it, some won't. They'll know Summit Church of Christ because they know you. That's it. But you are different. You know the body of Christ here. We're an eclectic bunch. We come from different countries. We have different accents. This week I got a little Bluetooth earphone, and it cost me $5. Came straight from China, no shipping. And there's a Chinese voice that tells me the battery's on, but the R's aren't mentioned. So it's real nice. And reminded me of how small our world has become. We come from a lot of different religious backgrounds. Some of us come from a lot of different types of churches of Christ. And yet we come here, and all we ask and all we want is the voice of the King. And that's all we listen to. And because of that, we form one body. And we encourage each other. I listened to one of the older members of our congregation getting hold of my brother this morning and saying, we are here, and listen to the conversation unfold. And it was sweet. This is where we need to be. It's a very impressive occasion. And it should really hurt us and bother us when we're not there. Secondly, not only is it an impressive occasion, it's also an invitation that is offered. And make no doubt about it, Jesus was hearing this, and he was hearing what people think about this invitation. You will see 3 invitations in this text. They come out very clearly. You'll see one invitation is going to be before Jesus died on the cross. You're going to see another one is from Acts chapter 1 through Acts chapter 9. You'll see a third invitation is from Acts chapter 10 to Maps. That's behind Revelation, right? So let's look at the first invitation. This you'll see in the Gospels, verse 3. And sent his servants to call those who were invited to the wedding feast, but they would not come. I mean, there's no excuse given. There's no reason why they're not coming. They just don't come. And you can think about Jesus in his earthly ministry, inviting the scribes, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, going into every synagogue he could, inviting the Jewish people first to come and be part of this, and they just ignored him. And how did he feel about that? What did he think about these people? What did he call them in Matthew 23? He had nothing nice to say about them. They were a brood of vipers. But what really gets me is how long had the nation of Israel, how long had God's people been waiting for the Messiah? How long? They've been waiting for this invitation for more than 2,000 years. The world had been in existence for 4,000 years at that point. And they just ignore it. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. There are people who grew up in the church, who knew, right now they know what we're doing, and they're not here. Unbelievable. I just can't figure it out. And I watch your lives, complicated, yes, ups and downs, yes, but I watch your lives getting better and better Sort of like Abraham, eventually sacrificing, being willing to sacrifice his son. Wow. And I see the growth. I see the growth amongst the Christian men and Christian women, amongst your young children, as they fellowship and as they worship. And I see the health of this church. And I know you're not ignoring this invitation. But secondly, what about from Acts chapter 1 through Acts chapter 9? Look at verses 4 through 8. Again, this is Luke 22, verses 4 through 8. Again, he sent other servants, saying, "Tell those invited, see, I've prepared my dinner. My oxen, my fat calves have been slaughtered, and everything is ready." Does this remind you of a song we sing? Everything is ready. Come to the wedding feast. I've got the words of the song. All things are ready, come to the feast. Come, for the table now is spread. He famishing, he weary, come, and thou shalt be richly fed. The refrain is, hear the invitation, come, whosoever will. Praise God for full salvation, for whosoever will. This is now an invitation. God's people, Israel, Yisrael, come, be part of this. And what are they going to do? Look at verse 5. But they paid no attention and went off. Some to their farms and some to their businesses. The farms produce, the businesses sell that which is produced. This is the economy. Every aspect of the economy. This is every geographical aspect where people could live. The rural and the cities. He's covering everything. And what is it? They pay no attention. But even worse than that, while the rest seized these servants, treated them shamefully, and killed them. You see Peter and James being beaten in Acts chapter 4 and Acts chapter 5, being threatened not to name the name of Christ. You see Stephen being stoned. You see the first apostle being martyred, Andrew being martyred. And you wonder, what does God think when a people turns their back on him? There was a time that France was a godly country. And then one day they took the Bible and they tied it to the back of a donkey's tail and dragged it through the city. And then at the end of that journey they burned it. France has fallen, its government has fallen 35 times since that time. There was a time when Hitler did the same thing. In 1933, he started to turn people away from religion, actively working against it. And God took them and exposed their guts. The innards, the dirty filth of the Nazi nation was exposed. I'm wondering, where's our country in this? And what does God think about that? Well, let's see. Verse 7. If you really want to pay attention to the nature of God, listen to Matthew 22:7. The king, who is that? God the Father. The king was angry, and he sent troops and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. In AD 70, Titus and Vespasian came in and destroyed Jerusalem. You remember that? He destroyed, he was angry. He destroyed those evil people. And he destroyed their city. Where was Judaism after AD 70? Where were they without their temple? No matter what you read, no matter what you believe. 1 John says, anybody that does not acknowledge the Son of God as the Son of God is the Antichrist. So you judge for yourself, but I'll tell you where the God the Father sits on this thing. He's not happy. When his invitation goes out and we just ignore it, I don't think he's happy. And I think when you sitting here accept this invitation, your neighbors see you drive out, your friends know where you are, your family knows where you are, your children, your siblings know where you are. And brethren, that speaks volumes to this world. When they come up this road and they're trying to charge up this road, and then there's indicators of people slamming on brakes and trying to weave in between these little orange things. And it does, folks. It really does. It tells the world that there is a people here. And throughout this great country, there's a remnant that will be faithful. I pray will always be faithful. And maybe, if we can find 10 faithful people, God will leave us alone, right? But we know that there is a limit to this, and he gets really angry. Verse 8. Then he said to his servants, The wedding feast is ready, but those invited were not worthy. I want you to understand something. There are a group of people passing out the invitations. They are called the servants, and they are you here today. I know that we're going to get a report, Brian, in a little while, but I want to make sure you understand that I was there and I saw more envelopes coming in after you'd counted even what was not on the board. It's amazing. His servants are busy, because look at the third invitation. This is where you and I are right now. This is what we are doing. We're going to the highways and the byways, and we're inviting everybody. And we'll see from the third point just now that we'll invite the bad and the good, and everybody's going to come in, and the king's going to come, and he's going to bind those, and we won't have to worry about that. But look at verse 9 here on the third invitation. Go therefore to the main roads, and invite to the wedding feast as many as you can find. Who should you be inviting? Go to the main roads, invite as many as you can find. Don't worry about who you invite. Just invite anybody that comes across your path in the main roads. Don't judge the book by its cover. Just invite everybody. There is a museum of broken relationships in Zagreb, Croatia. And it reminds me of some who were sitting here, who are no longer here today, who were faithful. And I'm thinking about what's their lives going to be like at the end. I'm also thinking about those of us who are still here, and we see those who have divorced themselves from Jesus Christ. In this museum, you can find a beautiful picture of a young couple on their wedding day. But you struggle to see it because somebody broke the glass. There's even an axe where somebody who wasn't happy with an ex-spouse took it to the furniture. There's all kinds of things, and people come out of this museum, some with tears running down their eyes as they've been inundated with what broken relationships look like. And yet others, young couples, come out there and they're saying, this is not going to be us. We will be faithful, right? And hopefully you hear this and you say, this is not going to be us. When the king comes and he looks at the banquet, we will be there. We will be there. But let's go on to the third point. The invitation can be overruled, and many people don't understand this, but it can. And this is the scary part, verses 10 through 14. And those servants went out into the roads and gathered all who they found, both bad and good. So the wedding hall was filled with guests. And I'm thinking about in anticipation for the Friends and Family Day, I'm thinking, wow, should we learn how to squeeze closer together? Should we learn, if you want to know how to park a car correctly, ask Don Pangburn. I mean, he will squeeze any number of cars into this area. What does our building look like? Should we have fresh flowers? And I've got all these questions going in because we're going to have a house full of guests, and I know it. I mean, it's going to be an incredible day. Verse 11, but when, oh my. If only there wasn't the word but, right? But you see, our responsibility is just to invite. But when the king, God the Father, came in to look at the guests, he saw there a man who had no wedding garment. Now, when you think about a man who doesn't have a wedding garment, and you put this together with Galatians 3:27, one of two scriptures that tell you how to get into Christ, you're baptized into Christ. Galatians 3:27, Galatians chapter 3, verse 27 adds a detail. How do you get into the church? You get a fresh set of clothes that you put on. Did you know that? You know what you put on when you're baptized? You put on Christ. You put on Christ in baptism. And when the king comes and he looks across the audience, he sees those who have the proper wedding garment. It was tradition, if a king gave a wedding, every single visitor to that wedding feast would have a wedding garment, and the king would provide the wedding garments. And so that's what he's doing. He's providing the wedding garment, and the wedding garment that you're putting on is his son. So that your shame and your unrighteous deeds would be covered. But as best as possible, we have to have those clothes on, and there is another way we can come in without those clothes. If we were part of his body and we did have those clothes and we continued to worship every Sunday, but we didn't have righteous deeds, we stepped out and we were unfaithful, we didn't continue to be faithful, even though we attended faithfully, maybe we weren't faithful. But definitely those who refused to be faithful. But he asks, verse 12, and he said to him, friend, which tells me at one point he might have been a friend of God. And Jesus says, you are friends of mine if you obey my commandments. So once he must have been a friend, he must have been a Christian. Friend, how did you get in here without a wedding garment? And he was speechless. Can you imagine what Judgment Day is going to be like? God's judging us. And there's a few that don't have the wedding garment like they should. And what are they going to say to God? If God was to judge you right now, and he was to say, you are not righteous, where is your wedding garment? What would you say to him? I think we can read here, right, Jacoby? We know what we'd say. We would say what? We'd be speechless. Every time an invitation goes by after a sermon, you know what's going on. You and I know what's going on. We know if we need to respond to that invitation. Whether it's publicly coming down or whether it's privately, we know what we need to do. Then the king said to his attendants, bind him hand and foot and cast him into outer darkness, where there is much weeping and gnashing of teeth. Can you imagine that? What is utter darkness like? I remember there was a little child, probably 8, 9 years old. I don't know how old this little boy was, but he had a newspaper route, and 3 o'clock in the morning he had to start his newspaper route. It was down one street and then up another street, but it was not really nice, because down this street very early was okay, but while it was still dark he had to run by a graveyard and then come up, and he would get so scared because it would be pitch dark. And he would run as fast as he could. And then he would stand just as he came out on the other side under a lamppost. And the light would just calm him down. And I'm thinking, I don't want to be in the darkness. I want to be in the light. I want to constantly be in the light. And I'm thinking about how can I do that? And this is a horrible thing. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Verse 14, here's the reason. For many are called, but few are chosen. The application to the lesson is real simple. Without knowing it, you were invited, all of you, and some of you fell asleep the moment the sermon started. Some of you kind of looked like you were paying attention, but you weren't. And what you were actually doing is not realizing that the Word is Jesus. And the Word, through Matthew 22, verses 1 through 14, was attempting to engage you. And you might have been here, but you might not have been here. But if you were, you'd be able to answer these questions. So let's go through them real quick. The king represents God. Very good. The king's son is Jesus. Excellent. The marriage supper privilege is the privileges of the saved. The messengers are us. Yes, exactly. The mistreatment of the messengers refers to the Jewish leaders. The rejection of the invitation is a rejection of who? Very good, Jesus Christ. The destruction of the city, what was the city? It was probably Jerusalem initially, more than that afterwards. The sending of the messengers into the byways includes the Gentiles. The man without the wedding garment is one of two, unbaptized or unfaithful. That's the only two things you've got to worry about. You know, want to get to this wedding, that's the only two things. Listen to this. This is from Revelation chapter 3, verse 18. I counsel you to buy from me gold refined by fire, so that you may be rich, and listen to this, and white garments, so that you may clothe yourself, and the shame of your nakedness may not be seen. Isn't that great? He covers our shame. Now, he's not saying we have no sin, but he's saying stay faithful. Stay with your righteous deeds as much as what is possible. And then, number 10, the coming of the king to see these guests is the final judgment. Okay? And that can happen any second. The binding of the offender and cast into hell And last one, number 12, speechlessness of the offender means that there is no defense. Have you ever had an unwelcome guest in your house? In 2009, two men, or two people, I don't know if it's a man or woman, but it was two people, got into a state dinner in the White House. They got in uninvited. They got in close enough to have their picture taken with the president. You might remember that, 2009, November, I think, 2009. They didn't stay in long, I don't think so. I know that there was a period of 9 months while we were on the mission field that 16 times we had an attempted unwelcome guest in our house. On 2 occasions, the burglars actually got into the house. And they were not welcomed. There were dogs barking, there was alarms going off. I was spraying watered down hydrochloric acid trying to dissuade them. Once I went down and beat one of them up. They weren't welcome, let me just put it that way. When you come into a place where you are not invited, where you are uninvited, you're not welcome. You don't need to be at that place. All of us need to be where the Father wants us to be. And we just have to worry about 2 things. Are you faithful? And have you put on Christ in baptism? If not, please hear the invitation. Jesus speaks invitation. He heard his Father telling him, speak this invitation. He heard 3 times people turning that invitation down. And praise the Lord that you are here because you've accepted that invitation. If you have accepted one more level to correct yourself so that you are dressed correctly in front of him, whether through the prayers of the church, whether repentance, whether privately between you and God, whether it is publicly coming forward to be baptized, whatever your need is, please accept his invitation right now as together we